Hi, I'm Becky, and I was diagnosed with severe ME in September 2016, and I made a full recovery in April 2018. So this video is really for people with severe ME or caring for people with severe ME, and they just want to cut to the chase and find out kind of how I got well. There's a lot more to it than what I'm going to say in this video, so do subscribe to hear more generally about my symptoms and my experience, but this will just focus on the two techniques that ended up working for me and how I got better. I am not proposing that anyone else does these techniques, I'm just saying that these both worked for me in conjunction, but I actually attribute the second one more to my recovery than the first. So starting from the point at which I had a diagnosis, I was assigned a cognitive behavioural therapist to manage an NHS-backed programme called Pacing. This is something that obviously many of you will be familiar with, especially if you're going through the NHS. But essentially what it means is figuring out what kind of amount of energy and time you can do anything for. So that might be like brushing your teeth or even just opening your eyes and sitting up. Depending on obviously how severe you are, but what amount of time you can do anything for before you then need to rest before your symptoms increase. I'll say from the beginning that this was a big challenge because I was very severe, so it felt like there was no window of time in which I could manage, but from the outset I started around trying to do something for sort of 10 minutes and then having a rest, and then I had a couple of weeks of continually crashing out, like that was not working. So we whittled it down to 5 minutes, but we reduced the rest time, again crashed out. And then in the end, what ended up working for me was starting at 2.5 minutes, which is obviously very, very small and was an indication of how unwell I was. But also we did bring down the rest time to something around 40 minutes. So I was doing 2.5 minutes on with 40 minutes off. Obviously I had to be so rigorous with this for it to work, which is a lot of pressure, and it was a lot of pressure. There's nothing that's going to remove that. Like, you can either stick to it or don't. I did, but it was very draining emotionally and things like that, but I just wanted to get better. So I did 2.5 minutes every 40 minutes, unless it was something that needed to be longer, so such as like a meal time. So if a meal time needed to be longer, I would do 2.5 minutes, little break, 2.5 minutes, little break until the meal was done. It took me about 6 months from the point at which it started working for me to get to about 20 minutes on 40 minutes rest. But I saw that increase quite consistently over kind of every type of task. So it wasn't just that I was just doing like basic daily tasks anymore. I could also do a 20-minute walk, or I could also do 20 minutes of reading, or whatever it may be. It consistently worked for me that each of the activities had gone up over that. From there, I was able to increase much quicker than I had been. So after about I think it was a year from starting at 2.5 minutes, I was around the 40-minute mark, and it only took about 2 months from there to get to the hour mark with half an hour's rest I think I was doing. So obviously I'd gone from being up for like literally less than an hour in a day in 2017 to being up for hours at the start of 2018. So obviously, again, to a healthy person, that's kind of confusingly slow. But for someone with severe ME, that's obviously like progress. So I'll talk a little bit more about kind of what I think it took to kind of stay on track with the pacing stuff in another video, but this is just to focus on the techniques I used. So technique number 1 was NHS pacing. And then when I was able to be up for an hour with about half an hour's rest, I went and did a program called the Lightning Process, which had been recommended to me by a friend who had a friend who'd had ME and got better, right at the start of my illness actually. And I thought I was too unwell for it because it requires 3 days in person with someone. And I thought there's no way in hell I'm doing 3 days in person with anyone when I'm this unwell. So I put it off until I thought I was well enough. And I was up kind of, like I say, an hour and then 20 minutes rest. And I started looking back into it because I'd also been speaking to another girl online from an ME community, and she said she'd also got better through the lightning process. So I kind of looked into it more, looked a lot of videos. There was a lot of kind of pros and cons online, but I just thought it was worth the risk. So in order to go in person and do a one-to-one session, I paid £1,000. It was 3 days. Obviously, I had to borrow that money from family, but you know, on the promise that I was getting better fully, it felt £1,000 well spent. But we didn't know if it would work, and we didn't know if it was made up or anything like that. I don't really want to speak too much about what the lightning process is, just because I'm not a trained practitioner of it. But what I will say is that I went in very fearful, very attached to my pacing that I've been doing because it had been working, albeit very stressfully. And I didn't know if it would work, but I was hopeful. So I wasn't ruling it out, but I wasn't convinced that I was going to be cured. I had a really good experience. The therapist that I had, or practitioner, whatever they go by, was great. She even said, stay in touch with me until you're 100% better. So she was willing to kind of deal with me outside of those 3 days. And part of how they kind of encourage you to get better is they ask you something at the start of the 3 days that you can't do. So I was like, right, well, I haven't ridden a bike since I got ill. And I used to ride my bike a lot. So they were like, great, tonight you're going to go and ride your bike using the process that we teach you. Obviously, I'd built up a degree of health at this point, but I still wasn't well or normal. So I was quite on the fence about doing it, but I did it anyways, and I rode the bike for the first time in 2 years since getting ill that night. The same kind of thing happened on day 2 and day 3. I chose things that I couldn't have done kind of prior. And then you go home and you have to continue practicing the process. It's not a cure, you do have to really continue and stick at it. But bit by bit, you see big drastic changes. So the following week, I'd actually booked my first holiday abroad since getting ill. And my intention was to go, at this point, I was probably moderate ME. So my intention was to go as someone who had moderate ME. So I was going to rest a lot and different things like that. And I didn't have any other expectation of the holiday. I just wanted a break. So I went on this holiday and I had the process kind of in my toolkit now. And I think it was day 2, I just stayed out from sort of normal breakfast time until evening. And I just kept using the process while I was out and about. And I didn't rest, and I didn't want to rest. I didn't think about resting particularly. I noticed that I wasn't resting. I didn't feel, like I could climb a mountain that day, but I wasn't in need of rest. I wasn't crashing, and things like that. So once you start to notice I found once you start to notice progress with the process, it really encourages you to keep going. So I kept going with it throughout that holiday, and I would say all in all, it probably took maybe about a month of some fluctuating symptoms, some getting a bit panicked, thinking, oh no, is this really working? Until I would say it fully started to cure my ME, if you want to say it like that. So yeah, that was kind of how it happened. I did pacing for over a year, maybe close to a year and a half, and then I did my lightning process, and I was pretty much cured within about 2 weeks to a month. Since then, I've had the process to fall back on. When I first began full-time work, and that was probably about 6 months after full recovery. I did use the process here and there. I didn't need to take a day off work. I didn't need to rest again. I just dipped into it and dipped back out of it, like literally while I was still at the office. And then I probably haven't used the process since 2019. And obviously it's now 2026 and I'm fully healthy. I've had 3 full-time jobs. I've traveled the world. I do every kind of fitness thing under the sun, and I don't have ME anymore. So I don't want to prescribe anyone a particular route, but I would encourage anyone who's entirely dismissing the lightning process without having tried it to try it, regardless, actually, I would say, of your current state. I actually regret waiting a year to do it. I wish I'd done it straight away, but who knows, maybe it ended up being the right medley of recovery for me, and that's how I got better and stayed better. But this is for anyone who has severe ME at the minute or is caring for someone who does, as future proof that they can get better. When I was unwell, I was constantly looking for evidence that I could get better, in what felt like a sea of evidence that I wouldn't. And now I am one of those stories, but there was a time when it was just a story for me as well. So I hope that this has helped someone, or at least given someone hope. And if you have questions, reach out. Thank you.